I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday morning and it's time for The Fix. Today we go behind the strategy of former President Jacob Zuma as he tried to sidestep being asked tough questions about his role in state capture at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry.
We will take no further part in these proceedings.
Then we look at the criminal justice system and its ability to deliver justice for all and fight corruption in a deeply unequal society. And as is custom, we take a look at the weekend newspapers to see what's made headlines this week and why. The Fix starts now. This is The Fix, where every Sunday, without fear or favour, we question the big hitters. We look ahead to tell you what matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. I'm Karima Brown. It's good to be back.
I have a problem because I'm being made to go through the details that are the details of the officials, and expected to remember every other detail on the work that generally is done by the DGs and the officials.
That's, of course, President Jacob Zuma there at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. Now, despite the testimonies of no less than 9 prominent South Africans, including former and current cabinet members and members of the civil servants, all of whom implicated Jacob Zuma in state capture, the former president managed to remember to forget all of the dealings he has ever had and the fact that he outsourced a lot of his responsibilities to his friends, the Guptas. He also tried to cast aspersions on former ministers by claiming they were spies. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's a vintage Zuma. So what does he hope to achieve by having selective amnesia? To help us understand the strategy, I'm joined from Cape Town by Professor Mark Swilling. He is the co-author of The Shadow State, as well as the co-author of the Betrayal of the Promise that details state capture. Professor Swilling, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me here on The Fix.
Morning, Karima.
Now, of course, we've seen President Jacob Zuma try a number of things. First, of course, he said as head of state he couldn't remember any of the details around some of the testimonies of very senior individuals that served in his government in one capacity or the other. Then, of course, he tried to tarnish the image of people that served with him, saying that they have an agenda, they were spies. And then, of course, he when he couldn't get away with information, particularly the evidence of Barbara Hogan, he threw a tantrum and said he was going to withdraw from the commission. What is the driving strategy behind what Mr. Zuma is doing? What exactly is he after? Is he trying to tarnish the reputation of the entire commission? Is he trying to divide the ANC further? What is his point that he's trying to make?
I think we need to understand this in quite simple terms. This is Jacob Zuma's comeback strategy. These were the opening shots in what is going to be an extremely divisive and dirty campaign. And the ANC might be, the ANC as a party might be the greatest victim. Mm-hmm. What we see unfolding before our eyes is a man who is trying to convince us that there has been a conspiracy to remove him from the political space over a period of nearly 3 decades. And this is a very dark world of spies, of handlers, of vendettas, of secrets, of spies and counter-spies. And it's a world that we're expected to believe in and understand. And the consequences is that there's nothing we can do about that world. There are dark forces that are determining our future, is what he would like us to believe. And he's the only man who can kind of understand it and stand up against it.
But a lot of the people that he's implicated, Professor Swilling, are actually challenging him. Spiwe Nyanda, the former head of the South African Defence Force, is challenging him. Nwako Ramatlhodi is challenging him. And so people are not taking this lying down. The fact that the African National Congress was infiltrated is, of course, well known. In fact, Jeremy Cronin, in a brilliant piece in News 24, says infiltration of the ANC was an obvious part of the apartheid regime's strategy. Jimmy Kruger, the then Minister of Justice at the time of the 76 student uprising, even boasted that says, of every 10 who crossed the border to find the ANC, 5 are mine. It was, of course, an exaggeration, but as Jeremy says, it was also part of what expanded considerably into an active Stratcom campaign of sowing confusion and paranoia on the other side. Is Jacob Zuma still paranoid? Is he still living in the past?
I mean, he's definitely paranoid, and he's definitely conjured up stories from the past in order to create this overriding analysis that effectively defines the ANC as hopelessly infiltrated and possibly even dispensable. I mean, the core message of this week, Mandela's birthday, the death of Donnie Clegg, is that there's a generation of South Africans who believed in agency, who believed we could shape our future.
Yes.
That's what Mandela believed in. The story we heard on Monday took us into a very dark place because it was a story of there's nothing you can do to change the fate of things. Only I understand how this world works. And remember what he said, wars today are fought not by armies, but by intelligence agents. And I am the master intelligent agent. I understand this world.
But
and this is the world that he took us into. And unsurprisingly, there are members of the ANC who is named and who have responded. And this is the opening shot of a very dirty battle.
Look, the fact that the ANC is involved in a deeply divisive struggle for power is kind of old hat. The fact that it's now taking an intelligence bent is kind of a new twist to what people are saying. But, I mean, stories of spies and counter-spies have been around for a long time. I'm not of the view that it necessarily has the kind of pull that it had, let's say, in the 1980s when someone was told that, they were a spy. Do you believe that the allegations of spies, considering how the ANC has morphed, taken on people from other parties that they've historically been enemies with, and so on, does it actually still have the pull that it would have had, when the struggle was waged, when we didn't have a democratic breakthrough in 1994?
Well, the meaning is completely different. I mean, what Jacob Zuma is trying to establish here is that not only he has enemies, but the alliance and forces, the radical economic transformation forces, as they call themselves, have enemies. And the focus of those enemies is to get rid of him as the leader of those forces. This is the purpose of this narrative. In the past, the spy narrative was internal discipline.
Yeah.
This is now about division, about the consolidation of an alliance that is going to propel him and his group back into power. And it means decimating. It means getting rid of those who stand in the way. And he, as he kept on saying, he's now reached the end of his tether. And he's going to use the commission, which is, after all, the culmination of this conspiracy to get rid of him, to use it as a platform to mount the beginnings of a comeback strategy. That's how I see it.
Professor, what I'm interested in is that former President Jacob Zuma ultimately threatened to withdraw from the commission, but he enacted this commission as a result of the remedial action of the former public protector. And, of course, his party supports this commission, and he's legally obliged to participate. More importantly, people like Spiwe Nyanda and them have applied to cross-examine him, and they have promised promised that they're going to cross-examine him in the way that a cross-examination actually takes place. What I'm trying to ask you is, do you think that his comeback strategy is landing with sufficient people in the African National Congress and in society generally for us to believe him or to give credence? Or is there a counter-narrative? The veterans that came out, the South African Communist Party that came out, the Katrada Foundation that came out, that says this is absolute nonsense. I mean, Cheryl Carolus actually said it is sick.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of reactions from the quarters that you are referred to, but I'm not so sure, to be really honest. I mean, it's nice to be optimistic and important to emphasize the strength of those forces, which after all were quite instrumental in bringing the state capture years to an end. But depicting himself as a victim in such a public stage appeals to millions of people in the most unequal society in the world who feel like victims. I mean, I got a message from just an ordinary person on my phone saying, "Shame, why are you so cruel to Umsholozi?" You know, this is the sentiment. So we mustn't underestimate the way this can appeal. And it works in many other parts of the world. Think of India, for example. So I think I hear you. I think there's merit in pointing out to the quarters that are against this. And it might well backfire within the ANC if you have a combination of people coming out against him and NPA action against some of the gangsters in the ANC. Maybe that could work, but at the moment the balance of forces within the ANC is in his favor. The rank and file.
Let's just play a clip quickly of his counsel asking for an adjournment of events, as we saw President Zuma being able to not being able really to answer questions and literally trying to kick for touch.
I'm going to be very cautious. You raised your voice last time I raised this complaint, so I'm going to be...
Yes.
I think I'm going to have to repeat what I said to you and Mr. Pretorius in a private place in chambers. I don't want to do that. But what I need to do now, I would like to have an adjournment. I have a view that my client was brought in here under false pretenses. And now I need him to make up his mind whether he wants to be cross-examined, because it's clear, it's just been confirmed. He's being cross-examined. All I'm asking, Chair, I'm going to repeat the things I said to both you and Mr. Pretorius, but for now, because I advise my client to respect this process, come here, cooperate with it. I want him to consider that position, because I think I advised him in bona fide, but I do not think I was right. And I would like him to consider his position, because now it's clear to me he's being cross-examined on the version, not his version, on what people said. I do think I need an adjournment with him.
Now, of course, Musi Sekakane desperately trying to drive a wedge between the counsel of the commission and Judge Zondo. And Judge Zondo was actually very precise when he came back and said that all the participants participate in the commission in a particular way, that questions are not going to be sent. Now, we saw that President Zuma, when he was being tried for corruption, do exactly this, blame the process, say the process is unfair, that he's not being treated fairly, as a delaying strategy. Often people refer to his legal strategy as a Stalingrat strategy, but I mean, he basically ran out of rope and he ran out of road. And the commission, clearly from what Judge Zondo said, as well as Advocate Pretorius, it didn't seem as if they were buying the fact that he was being ill-treated.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have an interesting situation where a commission is set up to find the truth, and the chief perpetrator represents that commission as guilty, as in some ways implicated in the unfolding of an intelligence strategy to remove him, of a conspiracy. So this is a deflection of attention away from what needs to be addressed, which is the details of who did what that resulted in the 9 wasted years. So I agree that strongly that Barbara Hogan's testimony created the kind of information that was very difficult for him to deal with. And the lawyer was very successful, I think, in saying you can only cross-examine somebody who's been accused of being guilty, whether they've admitted it or not. You can't cross-examine somebody who is here just to present his version of events. So I think I'm not sure Zondo has managed to get the commission out of the corner that Zuma has put the commission into, but a lot will depend on what happens when he comes back. If the deal that has been done is an agreement on a process that results in the suppression of key questions that will now not be answered, then we as a nation are in trouble.
Absolutely. In fact, today, in today's Sunday Times, former employees of Minister Collins Chabane, who of course was, according to Themba Maseko, given the instruction to sack him as head of GCIS, they are prepared to testify under oath and come to the commission that President Zuma actually did ask Collins Chabane to fire Mr. Maseko, and also that he asked them to introduce his son to business people. So there are people ready to lined up who are prepared to swear under oath that President Zuma was in fact center and front of the state capture project. You were a co-author of The Betrayal of the Promise, so you are intimately knowledgeable about the ways in which power was used and how he used his power. Given the kind of litany of evidence that there actually is, and the fact that we are now being told that, for example, President Zuma is being investigated by the Hawks for lying to the former public protector, saying he was never interviewed. So that is an active investigation now. Do you think that the law enforcement agencies and their work that lies ahead of them, considering the bulk of evidence that there is going to perhaps tip the scales in favor of the commission, and it's not going to be as easy as it used to be for President Zuma to just spin a tale of I'm a victim, I'm the victim of a conspiracy?
Yeah, I mean, what we need to realize is that the commission is all we've really had, a platform where all of this information can start to surface. But as the NPA gets itself sorted out and starts to get going with its actions and its trials, more and more information is going to start emerging, and there'll be a much greater balance, and it'll be much harder. But this reinforces the point. The reason for the urgency to discredit the commission, the reason for the urgency to launch the comeback strategy, the reason why a number of ANC leaders who are implicated in one way or another want to force things, and why the EFF is helping them to put so much pressure on Pravin Gordhan, is it's a race against time.
Yeah, absolutely.
The NPA is going to start taking action.
Absolutely.
And once it does,
Professor
it's
Swilling,
almost too late.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Professor Mark Swilling. Of course, when we return, we look at the promise of justice for all. The Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffrey, joins us from our Durban studios. Don't go away.